see the empty road for herself. The girl peered through the moonlight in every direction and, inexplicably calmed, fell asleep on her mother's shoulder. Oh, how tongues wagged the next morning, and oh, how the inn's patrons were teased. What was Ed's adding to his beer, the wives asked, that made men fearful old maids? Did a child's tantrum turn Baccio into a village of milksops? Sheepishly, the men shrugged, unable themselves to explain their spooked reaction to one ill-tempered customer. Vindication arrived soon enough, for not halfway through morning chores, a squad of soldiers rode into town, imperial soldiers, not the Duke's preening guards, and their weapons were polished from use, not show. Halting at the Duke's Arms, they asked if anyone had seen a lone traveller, a gaunt man with a severed ear. Eds had only begun to answer when the soldiers wheeled and galloped off toward the pass. Well, chores now stopped outright, and pigs and children whined unfed as the good folk of Baccio clustered to gossip over this unprecedented turn of events. Henpecked husbands stood tall, pointing out that their women were right grateful now. Little Trudy, muzzy yet from lack of sleep, received numerous kisses for being the first to notice the villain in their midst. How much of a villain they did not learn until late that afternoon, when the soldiers returned grimly bearing two bodies, one of their own, who in searching an abandoned shepherd's hut had drawn his weapon too late, and the mangled-ear stranger, whom the squad then set upon and killed at last. This man, the soldiers explained, had robbed and murdered his way across the empire, seeking in particular backwoods inns, and as evidence they displayed the wealth of a dozen victims found in his pack. How had the villagers known to turn him away? For otherwise they'd be burying, not chattering, this sunset. All eyes turned to Trudy, playing tag with the miller's boy. She could provide no explanation other than that the man had looked bad, and shyly she asked if she could pet the ponies. Smiling, the sergeant hoisted her up to stroke the nose of his majestic warhorse, and over her copper curls he informed the villagers that they owed this child their lives. Needless to say, the residents of Baccio began observing Trudy, and so noticed that she had a talent for staying out of trouble, unlike Tips the miller's boy, who would dance on the rooftops like the very devil himself. She was always elsewhere when Eds flew into one of his great rages, and often would coax Mina away as well before the man began seeking targets for his ire. When one day Trudy happened upon Tips and two other boys taunting Lloyd's prized new ram, she begged Tips to play with her instead, to which he readily acceded, for they were the dearest of friends, and therefore the lad was, for once, innocent when the enraged ram burst from his pen, never to be seen again. Yet when young women asked Trudy to prophesy their true love, or Ed sought her opinion of an odd-looking customer, she could only shake her head sadly. Soon, ashamed that she provoked such disappointment, she took to hiding herself away at the approach of any would-be supplicant. So they concluded the girl did have a talent. It was not magic, to be sure. There was no such thing as magic, and any fool claiming otherwise would end up in an asylum, or worse, but a certain limited gift. Tips, in his inimitable fashion, put it best. It's simple, really, or the feeling most folks gets after something happens, Trudy just happens to feel before. Phrased that way, then yes, the girl could often see the future, but only her own, and the potential futures of those she loved, sometimes the near future, sometimes not for days hence, but she could not always see enough to avert trouble, and certainly not when it mattered most. The day the beggar woman limped into town, Trudy, now aged 10, was hanging sheets to dry, and so did not observe the woman pass from house to house, seeking aid for her sick baby. Nor would Trudy speak, ever, of what her sight revealed, when finally she laid eyes on the pair. But from her hysteria and the sobbing manner she clung to her mother, the residents of Baccio knew it could not bode well. In the days that followed, the deadly fever claimed one life after another, and while some survivors muttered that Trudy should have done more to warn them all, the compassionate pointed out that the girl suffered as much as anyone, and praised how she had nursed her mother without respite until the woman left this earth. But in truth, they rarely paid much attention to Trudy at all. The girl's sight was her own private blessing and her own private curse. The villagers had grief and toil enough, with no time for needless wool-gathering. Yes, Trudy was an orphan now, with nowhere to go, but others had it worse. Others were